very warm welcome to each and every one of you. And this is in fact our very first session of our Create HDR series for the year. And I can see some familiar faces from all over the world, actually, Terry, and different continents, which is beautiful. And also I know some of you are based in Sydney, but also many of you from around the state and from different parts of Australia. Look, I really encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. You might like to acknowledge the country that you're on today as well. And if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself, feel absolutely free to do that as well. So the Create HDR sessions are essentially an opportunity for us to gather as researchers who have a common interest in arts-informed inquiry, and we're supported so generously by colleagues and academics who are experts in their field, who give so generously of their time on a very regular basis with their arms twisted and always with a smile to present an area of their research or an area of their expertise. And I know that today is no exception. So my name is Sue Orlovich. I know I've met many of you before, and I'm a research student at the University of Sydney. And a lovely hat that I also wear is to curate the HDR sessions for the Create Centre. And they run once a month on a Thursday afternoon. And this, of course, is the very first one for 2023. So they're an opportunity for people to gather, to support each other, to have some wonderful input from an expert in the field. And if there's feedback or thoughts or ideas that you have that we can use to generate improvements to the way that we run the HDR sessions, I'll pop my email in the chat, and you're very, very welcome to make contact and share your thoughts and ideas. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today. I'm on the land of the Darawal people, and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. And I extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who may have joined us today. So a reminder that we actually record the sessions and make them available through the Create website on our YouTube channel. So they're great if you're not able to attend, or if you'd like to go back and revisit them as well. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce Professor Liz Mackinlay. Liz is a professor in the Faculty of Education at Southern Cross University. She holds a PhD in ethnomusicology from the University of Adelaide and a PhD in education from the University of Queensland. Liz's research focuses on gender, feminism and higher education, decoloniality in the academy, autoethnographic and alternative approaches to academic writing. I got my tongue around all of that, Liz. Now, as Liz is presenting, I'll share a little bit more about some of the roles that she plays both externally and within the university, so you can start to get a picture of some of her passions, but also some of the recent works that she has written. I'll share some information about that as well. Now, Liz's passion for her academic work flows into all areas of her life. Alongside reading, writing, thinking, drawing, she loves to run, and she can be found regularly running the streets of her hometown. And Liz is a material girl at heart who enjoys making quilts to wrap around those she loves. She enjoys spending lazy weekends with a book in hand, watching her boys play AFL football, catching up with friends for a good conversation over coffee, and relaxing together as a family in the warmth of their home. So in today's session, Liz is going to share some of her recent work about an initiative called DRAW, which began in 2019 during her time in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Queensland. And DRAW, or Departing Radically in Academic Writing, is an initiative that provokes us to think about the question, how might radically creative and critical work Reimagine Doctoral Thesis Writing. And this is the topic of Liz's presentation today. So Liz, it's a thrill to have you presenting for us today, and a really warm welcome from all of us. And thank you for taking the time to share with us today. So I might hand over to you now, Liz.
Thank you, Susan, and thanks everyone. It's really lovely to see you all here. And I was saying to Susan, it's an absolute privilege and pleasure to talk to you about draw today. Doesn't feel like work at all, because this is absolutely one of the passions that my pocket of joy in the academic world that we live in, and I'm really excited to be sharing it with you today. I have a PowerPoint to help keep me on track and hopefully provide a little bit of some provocations for you, and also obviously some information that you might find useful. So if you'll bear with me, I will screen share and get that happening now. Okay, so just make sure I've got all of the bits and pieces connected that I need to. Hopefully you're seeing a little girl and what's departing radically got to do with academic writing, is that right?
That's right.
Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you as a white settler colonial woman on Meanjin, the traditional lands of Yagara and Turrbal peoples in the southwestern suburb of Indooroopilly in Brisbane. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their unceded sovereignty. This always was and always will be Yagara and Turrbal land. I also acknowledge Indigenous peoples who have joined us from places near and far, remembering that gatherings such as this are conversations where knowledge is shared, mediated and constructed and made anew in many Indigenous communities. I'm grateful. I also acknowledge my family from another country who stand with me today and who are at the heart of every word I speak and write and share. My two Yanyuwa sons and Yanyuwa Garawamara and Guranji families from Borroloola in the Northern Territory. Angana Wukani Yinda, Bajinda Yalaga, Kura Ababa, Amarawara Agujaka Agulagula, Angabuji, Kinabirila, Yalaka, Bawajibala. I'm going to share with you a little bit of draw performativity to begin. Release the play of academic writing, Donna Haraway cried over 30 years ago. Transforming the standard, staid and stuck cultures of academic writing is now a deadly serious matter. Laurel Richardson heard her and excitedly joined the new writing fields of play begun by post-structural and feminist writing nonconformers. For nearly a decade, Richardson poked and prodded textual and discursive academic conventions wherever and whenever she could, but soon lamented that the incessant production of unexamined, fact-orientated, plain prose-style linear narrative expectation, read past theory, literature review, present hypothesis, methods of testing, findings, future research, continued to limit what can be known and told. Another 10 years passed by, but still the same old academic writing conventions promulgated presentations and publications. Bewildered and bothered by this, Patty Laver and Elizabeth St. Pierre called out, what might the new process, product and purpose of qualitative academic writing come to be if we left the old behind and did something else? Meanwhile, the Academy was receding, so that the words appeared in books about the world among the shelves grew whiter and whiter, and the people who wrote them more and more indistinct. The white noise of radio, excuse the language, okay, fucked here, hummed ominously in the background. A small group of doctoral students, reserved, determined looking, waited with shitty little drafts of words that threatened to block their way, crossed the fading campus. The building sputtered as academic writing life slowly but surely evaporated in this big dark place they had no wish to call their own. The library crackled intermittently like static on a wire. There was also on the grounds the distant explosive bursts of a leaf blower, firing decaying debris further and further away down the abandoned road. A man in a grey Chevrolet with a bumper sticker which read, "Status quo, the only way to go," circled the perfect perimeter. Old oak trees stood resolutely by, holding their peace quietly like wise old stalks of broccoli. Yet, what composed the present moment? Virginia Woolf might have asked. The words she offered in reply crossed from there and then to the hush of here and now. If you are young, she began, the future lies upon the present, like a piece of glass, making it tremble and quiver. The doctoral students paused as a sage old and sassy zephyr softly rustled the waves in their minds. Woolf continued, if you are old, the past lies upon the present, like a thick glass making it waver, distorting it. She now had the doctoral students' full attention, for very quietly something had slid into that moment and rippled the skin of the taken-for-granted strategies, structures, and strictures of academic writing. What is that thing? The doctoral students wondered. What is that shimmer of sensation which lies beneath the semblance of this moment? The doctoral students sat themselves down on a sturdy wooden bench on the edges of the grass in the great court in the heart of the academy to watch and wait for the something to arrive. They munched on the carrot sticks they had packed for lunch as a woman in a red hat passed by. Then, one by one, sparks of awareness began to arrive, fitful at first, but soon wide awake and firing on all cylinders. The rich yellow glow lit the lamp in the doctoral students' spines, that seat where the heart and soul reside. They watched with growing delight as all the stock-boring and dead words they and others like them had ever written began to smoulder in the flames. Let them blaze, they heard Virginia Woolf whoop in the distance. All doubt was over. It was time to do something to end this horrible moment of academic writing inertia. The doctoral students looked at one another, and there it was. The snap. This was the taste of their pineapple latte, their shot at dancing with the absurdity of life instead of being squashed by it. There was a rush of terror, followed closely by exultation. The departing radically in academic writing rebellion had begun. They called and people came to the first draw writing school in November 2019, where standard qualitative writing conventions were downplayed and alternative and creative criticality was privileged, made purposeful, performed and practiced. They called and people turned their attention to the graduation stage. 9 drawers have now successfully defended their drawn theses and had their doctoral degrees conferred. They called and people signed up to the Draw private Facebook group, now over 200 members strong. They called and people contributed to a number of academic publications, including doing rebellious research with Brill Publishers, writing radically as women with Virginia Woolf in qualitative inquiry, and very excitingly, a Draw publication, which is to be published by Routledge this year. Watch this space. They called and people showed up to a monthly meet via Zoom to think, wonder, and share their radical departures in writing with one another. They called, and since March 2020, drawers have been coming together online to shut up and write every weekday morning from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. So that is a little bit of background to Draw, and hopefully gives you a little bit of a taste of the kind of what Draw might feel, sound, be like when we start to think about departing radically in academic writing. So today, I know we've only got an hour and I'm going to speed through things very quickly, but I just want to give you a little bit of a taster about the roots of Draw. I know that as HDR students, there's a lot of trepidation around making this radical departure, because we know that the Academy has these very standard expectations around what a thesis should look like, what a journal publication could look like. And so what I really hope today is that you get a sense of it is absolutely possible to do this work, and it's possible because we ground ourselves in a really tight criticality. So we immerse ourselves in theory and thinking about the departures we make, why they might be radical, and what we can do to ensure that our work becomes part of the academic canon in some ways. So I want to give you a sense of the literature that you can turn to support you if you want to do this work. And then I'm going to give you a couple of provocations to draw. Hopefully, if we had a longer time together, we would develop these more fully, but just to give you a bit of a taste of what you could do with draw work and some ways to begin that work. That's what I'm hoping to do. So a little bit more about me. As Susan said, I've been working in the Academy for some time now. I've got this dual background, I once called it eclectic, but now I still think it is, but I think one of the absolute threads that ties this all together is a very strong feminist sensibility. So a lot of my work relates to feminism, particularly more recently around feminism in the Academy, feminist autoethnography, and really wrapping myself around the theory, words, and the language of women writers to support the work that I do. Some of you might maybe recognize the picture on I think it's your left. That's a sketch that was almost finished or partway through of Helene Sixou, who many of you would know her perhaps for The Laugh of the Medusa and other work. I'm in love with Helene Sixou. She's someone I find an absolutely stimulating writer, both in terms of thinking, but also politically and poetically as well. And I like to sketch and draw, as well as DRAW. So I have this little gal that I think and write with often, and there she is snuggled up to Helene Sixou. Writing Feminist Autoethnography is a book that came out last year, and hopefully it gives you a sense of how you can use the theories of women writers and writers in general, but also their writing strategy in terms of an aesthetic. What are some of the aesthetic tools that writers use to do their work, and how you could think about how to bring those in to your own. I guess one of the things about draw that is a hallmark of what we do is to think about, for example, if you love the work of Helene Sixou and you're really keen about writing in a woman's language, it's important to think around, how does she actually write? What is the craft of her writing? So you're not only thinking with her ideas, you're thinking with her the craft of her writing. So for me, I've got a chapter on Helene Sixou in Writing Feminist Autoethnography, and Helene Sixou writes a lot of plays. So my chapter on Helene Sixou is a play script, and it's set up like a play. Hopefully you would pick it up and you would read it as though it were a script, and maybe someone could perform it one day, and has a number of different characters in it. So the provocation there is that whatever theorist you're working with, it's not only about the ideas that they bring to assist you in whatever topic it is you're researching, but take some time to think about how they actually do the work and the craft of writing itself. It's amazing when you start looking about how many of the really well-known philosophers and thinkers that we go to actually write about writing. Deleuze and Guattari have written about writing. Helene Sixou has written about writing. Laurel Richardson writes about writing. Simone de Beauvoir writes about writing. So alongside all this amazing theoretical work that they have shared, gifted us, they've also given them some insight into the craft of writing. So I'd really encourage you to go looking. And if it's not an essay on writing, so many of these thinkers that we work with have also been amazing letter writers or journal keepers. You can get another insight into their work through other genres of writing that they're engaged with. So I'd really encourage you to do that. The picture of me sitting in my little fluffy hat is in Liverpool, out with the statue of Eleanor Rigby. I don't know if anyone has been there, but one of my children is a Beatles fan, and we just happened to be in the UK. I was doing a bit of work there, and I wanted to sit with Eleanor Rigby. But what I was doing as I was away was every day I took a photograph, and I wrote 200 words about that photograph. And I wrote a piece about Eleanor Rigby, and it became a photo essay that I put online, and I'll share this with you in a moment. But I write a regular, semi-regular blog called Insister, IN-SISTER, which is me playing around creatively and critically with writing and ideas. And I'll share some of that with you in a moment. But I just wanted to give you a sense of, this is kind of the spectrum of the writing that I do. And as I've progressed in my academic career, I guess my work has become more and more radical as we've gone along. And so, yeah, I thought maybe one of the things I could do, if you'd like, is share with you a piece, the most recent piece I uploaded to Insister, if you'd like me to. It's only very short. Some of them are short. Most of them I try to keep under 2,000 words. Would you like me to do that? Just to give you another example of my own very current work. So if you want to, you can jump in and have a look at this. There's the website. And this piece is called Shirley and Sylvia. And it's a homage in many ways to Sylvia Plath and Shirley Jackson, who some of you might know as a Gothic horror writer. Here we go. Sylvia cries, "Shirley, come, let's be grisly and girly together." She hopes and wonders beyond weather. Photographs, sorry, no, that's not the right bit. I'll start at the start. She looks at the light streaming through the cracks in her quill feather. Words arrive incandescent and spare. Sylvia cries, "Shirley, come, let's be grisly and girly together." Another angle flares the passage of time as it weathers. They are friends forever, called and rise to eat men like air. She looks at the light streaming through the cracks in her quill feather. She hopes and wonders beyond weather, photographs and interviews to begin a love affair. Sylvia cries, "Shirley, come, let's be grisly and girly together." Which is worse, fanciful madness or madness that fancies whatever? Beef books and babies wrapped up in bicarbonate dusted basketware. She looks at the light streaming through the cracks in her quill feather. She looks at the blonde girl in the mirror, tight and tense in tether. Wrapping the glass and the ghost in a secret sheet, saves her from despair. Sylvia cries, "Shirley, come, let's be grisly and girly together." Those ugly chalk masks shall be poisoned in equal measure. If they don't like our peaches, we can tell them, then don't shake our pear. She looks at the light streaming through the cracks in her quill feather. Sylvia cries, "Shirley, come, let's be grisly and girly together." Shirley thought, brave girl, she wants her cup of stars, and so do I. She looks at the sheeted mirror and sings her darlings a sweet lullaby. It all starts to happen in the suburbs, somewhere between celebration and calamity. Shirley thought, brave girl, she wants a cup of tea, stars, and so do I. She gazes at them waltzing deliberate and free in the black night sky. One world is writing, the other is not, she scribbles emphatically. She looks at the sheeted mirror and sings her darlings a sweet lullaby. Demons within and demons without galloping nearby. She watches Sylvia howl at the moon, serenading her insanity. Shirley thought, brave girl, she wants a cup of stars, and so do I. Together, let's write ourselves into our houses and bid the world goodbye. We will find a way to stand and walk alone in our duality. She looks at the sheeted mirror and sings her darlings a sweet lullaby. Gold-trimmed dishes, a white cat, and the sweetness of apple pie. A simmering housewife and mother mixing darkness with dreamed reality. Shirley thought, brave girl, she wants her cup of stars, and so do I. With eyes wide shut, the world drops dead, so don't bother to apply. Captain, oh captain, laughter is at once possibility and fatality. She looks at the sheeted mirror and sings her darlings a sweet lullaby. Shirley thought, brave girl, she wants her cup of stars, and so do I. I said, a pair of villanelles, the perfect partner to this crime. We are imprisoned in the cell of our own limitations, Sylvia shakes her head. I said, a pair of villanelles, the perfect partner to this crime. Writing is the way out, Shirley offers, taking a bite of her homemade gingerbread. The house is haunting on the hill and fills me with dread. My feet patter the pavement carved with angles of time. We are imprisoned in the cell of our own limitations. Sylvia shakes her head. I found sparkles of serendipity in the sink and tied them with thread. One eye saw golden and orange, the other shades of blue and lime. Writing is the way out, Shirley offers, taking a bite of her homemade gingerbread. We smiled at one another when we met unexpectedly in pages laced with lead. One 30 years, the other 48, and the third 51, already past her prime. We are imprisoned in the cell of our own limitations. Sylvia shakes her head. We find solace in darkness with leaves, branches, and firewood blanketing a bed. A small glass of brandy, cigarettes, matches, and an ashtray, and a buried dime. Writing is the way out, Shirley offers, taking a bite of her homemade gingerbread. I had planned to compose 6, but ended up with half instead. Raising demons is harder than you think when they chant their own rhyme. We are imprisoned in the cell of our own limitations, Sylvia shakes her head. Writing is the way out, Shirley offers, taking a bite of her homemade gingerbread. A note on this post. There's always a backstory to the story that sits there in secret, waiting to be told behind the story that is. That's how stories seem to go. The story behind this post goes something like this. During April 2023, I was reading Shirley Jackson's The Lottery and Other Stories, while at the same time reading a biography of Sylvia Plath. It had not crossed my mind to put the two writers together, one a Gothic feminist novelist, the other a confessional poet and autobiographical fiction writer. But then Sylvia made the connection for me. The story goes that in June 1953, while a student at Smith's College in Massachusetts, Sylvia was offered a month-long placement as a guest editor with a prestigious magazine, Mademoiselle. To enhance the experience, Mademoiselle arranged literary activities that might be of interest to the interns, and Sylvia specifically requested interviews with authors she admired, including Shirley Jackson. Sylvia was drawn to the exploration of madness and psychological breakdown in Shirley's writing, and was inspired to find ways to fictionalize her own, which she did in The Bell Jar. Reading about Sylvia's fascination for Shirley mirrored my own at precisely the same time. Originally titled The Lottery or The Adventures of James Harris, Shirley's collection of short stories is macabre, gruesome, and sinister, and peppered throughout by a character called James Harris. He is never seen, he never speaks a word, but he is there all the same, just out of reach, disrupting and destroying the lives of those he slips in and out of. The story goes that Shirley quite possibly learnt the English ballad known variously as The Demon Lover, James Harris, and A Warning for Married Women from her mother. The story in the song goes something like this. A pretty young maiden takes a sailor lover. He dies at sea. She marries another. He returns as a spirit to persuade her to come away with him. She does. Her real-life husband takes his life and their children are orphaned. The story then goes that I thought I might try to mimic Shirley Jackson by having Shirley appear as a returning character in a set of villanelles, riffing off lines from my favourite Sylvia Plath villanelle, Mad Girl's Love Song. The lines of verse presented in this collection of 3 are drawn from the synchronicities I sense between Sylvia and Shirley, words of theirs and mine sifted and shifted across and between. What would happen if the 3 of us came together to sing a ballad of our own? And that's how this story went. So that's just a bit of background to that piece, and hopefully every line in the villanelles, which is a particular poetic form that I happen to be a bit obsessed with, that Shirley speaks or Sylvia speaks, is drawn from their writing, and I've mixed and mingled it with my own thoughts to create this pattern. And in this piece, you can hopefully see that it's a mixing up of being a housewife, being trapped in a house, being trapped by patriarchy, trying to find a way out, writing is the way out, and searching for mechanisms to do that. And you can see that one of the things I also like to do is these black and white sketches, and I've been playing around a bit lately with this kind of image that you can see on the screen as a way of adding something else, searching for that shimmer and adding that on top of what's going on. So it's absolutely an experiment, and I try to write 2 of these blogs every month, and just to play around with some of the ideas that I'm reading. My next one, I think, might be something called Ink Pots and Ashtrays. Some of you might know Virginia Woolf very famously throws an ink pot at what she calls the angel in the house, which are the senses that try to stop her from writing in the way she would want to. And Shirley Jackson similarly picks up an ashtray to try and smash the men in her life who are controlling and confining her. So I can see a similarity with those two. So just to give you a little bit of taste and maybe a little bit of inspiration to, try a form of writing. In this case, this is poetry, just to see what happens. So I guess one of the things, as you can see, hopefully, is that part of the draw philosophy is about writing life. So being prepared to put yourself in your own skin. And this is a piece from a paragraph from Kathleen Stewart, who some of you might know, an affect theorist, a sociologist, ethnographer, who writes a lot about this idea of things that are happening around us and paying attention, becoming attuned to those things that sit just out of the corner of our eye, and watching and waiting to see what happens with that thing that's shimmering just there. And this is a lovely piece about learning to write in my own skin. And one of the provocations I'll leave with you today is for you to think about, we often talk about writing in the academy. We all know we've got to write a thesis. We've got this many words in a journal article, an abstract, whatever it might be. And often we think about it as divorced from ourselves as writers. We think of ourselves as researchers, as students, but I wonder how often you might stop and think of yourself as a writer. So if you put these two things together, researching, life, you've probably got a really neat abstract around your thesis and what you're doing. But if you add to that and embrace with this other idea of writing, life, what does that look and feel like for you? And how are those two things brought together? The reason for talking about that in particular is that the word radical in departing radically in academic writing, it makes a really nice acronym and we love it, but there's a point to it. One of the things about draw is that the other thing we pay attention to is words. And we're very much inspired by Virginia Woolf, who I'll talk about in a moment. But if we go to the etymological roots of the word radical, this is what you'll find, that it's about the vitality of life, returning to the very roots of life. And we love that because it fits into this idea of writing, life. So we return to the roots. We turn to bring our writing and our work in the academy to life once more. So that's one of the basic premises. This is a little sketch I did of another philosopher I love, Simone Weil. Oops, I'll go back. Simone Weil wrote a very political text called The Need for Roots, but she certainly talks about this idea that that vitality of life is one of the most important and least recognized needs of the human soul. And I think for those of us who work in the academy would absolutely hold to that idea of being able to sustain ourselves. We have to be able to breathe. And so I think remembering the radicality that sits there just waiting for us, a carrot stick in your lunchbox, a shimmer that's just waiting for you to take notice, a sassy zephyr, a woman in a red hat passing by, thinking around what are the roots that I'm what are my roots? What brings me to life when I research and write, knowing that the two things are linked together. So paying attention to words is really, really important. And I guess lots of people write about the significance of words, but I'm particularly fond of Virginia Woolf's take on it. Some of you might know an essay she wrote called On Craftsmanship, and it's the only recording that we have of Woolf speaking. It's in the British Library. So if you want to Google On Craftsmanship, Virginia Woolf, you'll get to hear this piece. And she talks about how she speaks about words as though they are sentient beings. Words are alive in the world. And I love this quote from her as well. This is in her collection of her diaries, entries on writing. She says, there's no trifling with words. It can't be done, not when they're to stand forever. And here we get this sense of the life of words, that they sit with us. They're alive in books. They do things in the world, and they do things in a political, a social, a moral, a philosophical, an aesthetic, and a personal sense. So she's asking us to think really carefully about those words and how we put them together. And these are some of the other ways she describes words, which I just love. She talks about them being alive in the mind. She describes them as crafty, clever, powerful, cheeky little vagabonds. But the one that I particularly love is as sovereign beings who have agency. Once we put them in a book, once we've written them down, we have lost complete control over what will happen and what they will do in the world. They are out there on their own. And I just love that sentiment and that sensibility. It really does start to bring the way that you are using words and thinking about words and writing words to life in a different way. So here's the link if you're keen to have a look. It's called Words Fail Me. So please, if you've got a bit of time, I don't know if any of you have heard that recording, but the first time I heard it, Virginia Woolf's accent is quite confronting. Not what I thought, based on everything that I had read. I don't know why. I won't say anymore, but yeah, have a listen. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece. And so with all of those things in mind, then one of the key things about draw is to attune, attach, and pay attention. So in that moment of waiting for something to arrive, we are paying attention to what's going on around us. We are attaching ourselves to life rather than distancing ourselves from it. And then we are becoming, therefore, attuned to everything that's going on around us. So that's another kind of mantra, draw mantra for us. And so just out of interest, you've heard lots of words from me already, and I'd be really keen for you to just write down one word that has your attention in this moment. I'm just going to put my light on because I've just realised it's getting dark. That's better. So just write one word down. It could be anything, and hold on to it. We're going to do a little bit of work as we go through. So when we think about drawing, and this is probably something that you've heard if you've done any reading about post methodologies in writing, post-qualitative writing, is writing as a method of inquiry. So it's not so much that you already know what you know. It's as you start the writing process, you are, kind of searching, wandering, and wandering and wondering at the same time. You are being prepared to go where your thinking and your words go rather than setting up a really nice structure. And it's actually something really hard to do. We've all got this kind of sense of, I've got to have my introduction and I've got to say what I'm going to do. I've got to put it this way, and then I've got my literature review, and then I've got my methodology, and we've got this kind of template in our mind. But a writing as a method of inquiry says, just leave all of that to the side for now, just to see what might happen. And one of the people who is absolutely, in terms of people you can turn to give yourself the grounding to do this work, the theoretical justification, if you like, is Laurel Richardson. And this is an absolutely wonderful book, Fields of Play, Constructing an Academic Life. It is a collection of all of her writing over the years and her reflections on the kind of work that she did. And in 2016, two scholars from all around the world came together and contributed to a book called Permission in honour of Laurel Richardson. And it was really about, what has Laurel Richardson made possible for us? What permission has she given us to do something different, to do the something else that Betty St. Pierre and Patty Lather were asking? And I love this piece too. And this is something that she wrote in the book about her own work. She says, I age, the built environment is unbuilt and rebuilt, cultural pegs splinter, but I am still here, writing for my life like you. So there again is that kind of sensibility about life and writing. But I'd just like to now locate Laurel theoretically so that you can get a sense of why she's so important. So the first part is around her work as a post-structural and postmodernist scholar. And she's one of the first people to begin writing, and it doesn't seem like it was, well, it's 2002. So that's 21 years ago. It's quite some time ago now. So when people say to you, oh, this radically departing in academic writing is really new, I've never seen it before. Actually, it's a load of nonsense. It's been around for quite some time, and there's a large body of scholarship. The reason why Laurel Richardson starts to say, okay, maybe we need to do something different, is because she starts to hang on to and explore this idea that no textual staging is ever innocent. And if language is, as it is, a constitutive force, it's constituting particular types of privileges and powers and politics. So she's casting doubt on the types of discourse that set up particular kinds of capital T truths around what can be said and how it might be said. And as soon as we start to cast doubt on that discourse, that's when we open up a whole new creative force, as she writes here, for revisioning storytelling. I have all of the references at the end of the PowerPoint, which I'll share with you, so don't stress about wanting to know where they all come from. So first of all, we locate her in the posts. And we also then locate her in feminism, and I think this is something that is quite significant. Laurel Richardson started her life as a PhD student in maths in the 1970s. And if you know anything about feminist theory and history and how that's all working together alongside postmodernism and kind of the postmodern crisis of representation in the 1970s, Laurel Richardson begins her work there. So she starts her work in a maths department, but it's a sociological study, and it becomes a sociological study of the culture of mathematics and gender. So for her, as you could imagine, the personal became political. That's the catch cry we know very well from the second wave feminism. It was absolutely personal and political all at once. And she cites and quotes this experience of putting in a paper for publication, which was called Women in Science, Why So Few? I mean, this is the STEM, the Sage, Athena Swan Sage movement happening in the 1970s. And she got a rejection letter which said that it had to be rejected because it was obviously written by a woman, because no one but a woman would be interested in it. And you're probably all shaking your head in disbelief, but you could see how that would also be, that would light the lamp in your spine, wouldn't it? To keep speaking and to keep finding a way to have your voice heard. And so that's part of the imperative. So we've got the post-structuralism, and then we have feminism. And then the second part of the locating Laurel is around her exploration and experimentation with alternative forms of representation. So in terms of the departures and the way that we do our writing and what it looks like on a page, Laurel Richardson has been doing this work for a very long time, and I'll just quickly explore some of that. So she writes about this in 1988, where she goes to a conference, and I'm sure you've probably all had this experience, and she's sitting in papers and she's thinking to herself, oh my God, these are so boring. Oh, I guess I'll write that down. And so she said to somebody, oh my God, these papers are so, why can't they find an interesting way to deliver their message? They've got all this amazing data and they've got this amazing topic and these people have shared their lives with them. And yet, and she says, it just popped out. And everyone started to say, oh, Laurel, that's a bit heretical. Like you're really rocking the boat there. But then she started to talk more often and to write about, as she writes here, being terminally bored with standard sociology. And so she starts to ask particular questions. And for her, they weren't arbitrary. And it wasn't just her being bored by what people weren't putting on a flashy enough performance for her. For her, they were actually very deeply ethical questions around what happens when we collect data from human beings. What are our ethical responsibilities to represent that to the world in a way that the world can connect with? Not just read about in a journal paper, to connect with in the sense that the things that I write are transformative for the world, for the people who've shared it. So she asks these questions, and, you know, she's writing this in 1988, so it's quite some time ago. So if ever you're doubting, just think, Laurel Richardson, 1988, yes, I can do this. She asks, what do we write about? How do we write it? And for whom do we write? Absolutely fundamental questions. I can remember when I did my first PhD asking those same questions. I was a non-Indigenous person working with Aboriginal people in the Territory, thinking to myself, what the hell is a musical analysis of women's songs about this topic ever going to do? How will that ever speak to the people I love and the people I'm working with? The story was not good enough, and not good enough for a range of reasons, which at the heart there's a deeply ethical question. And this is also a question for her around how do the specific circumstances in which we write affect what we write, and how does what we write affect who we become? So she's always thinking about these two things as in a really intimate relationship. And so for her, this was all very troubling. And so she says, okay, that's it. I'm going to reject the stock standard boring sociology. And this is one of her pieces that she submitted for publication, which it speaks for itself, really, doesn't it, in terms of how particularly sociologists recruit people for study, ask them to share their lives with them, and then reproduce that in publications. Laurel Richardson wanted children aged 6 to 12 who've recently experienced death of parent or grandparent for psychological scientific research. The children will not be harmed. And of course, we know already that is an absolutely ridiculous kind of premise, that children would not be harmed. And so she says, okay, I'm not reading paraphrasing writing anymore. It lacks credibility and it's boring. I'm rejecting the self-centered reflexivity where people are studied as garnishes and condiments that are tasty only in relationship to the main course, the sociologist. So she's saying, no more, I'm done with that. And so she doesn't. She absolutely goes ahead and writes in quite radical ways. So if you pick up Constructing an Academic Life, Fields of Play, you'll see the range of that. She's very famous for writing a piece around Louisa May. So she did a study of single mothers, and she interviewed lots of single mothers in a particular part of America. Escapes where that was, escapes me. But as a way of representing that, she created a composite character called Louisa May, and she wrote up the data as poetry, as research poetry. So Laurel Richardson is also, if you're interested in data poetry and what that might look like, her work is often held up as a hallmark of that. And the poem Louisa May is definitely kind of the beginnings of that movement. So just to quickly talk about post-sensibilities then, I'm sure many of you were already thinking around that if you're looking at, you know, the work of Betty St. Pierre and Patty Lather and Maggie McClure perhaps, but just to think about this idea that part of the imperative is around understanding that language is absolutely grounded in particular types of powers and privileges and sets of politics and philosophies. And that the writing that we do produces things and particular types of things that reproduce that power and those politics and those privileges. And so she's asking us to think carefully about the language that we use. And as many of you would know, this is also linking at a time when all of the boundaries around producing objective facts about and truths about reality are being seriously questioned, particularly in social sciences. And I love this quote. This is really important. She says, we no longer need to give up humanity for the illusion of objective knowledge. And I think even in a post-human, more than human world, that still there's still a really ethical sentiment that sits there around kindness, care, compassion, non-violence, epistemologically, politically, philosophically, in all of those ways, ontologically, is very, very strong in her work. And this is from Betty St. Pierre, where she's saying, conventional humanist qualitative methodology, which pretty much, is the stock standard in the academy still today. This is what we're expected to do. And if we do it this way, our projects are recognisable, clear and accessible. That's absolutely, I think many of you would recognise that as what's there. And this is a piece I did one day when I was feeling particularly downhearted about the academy and being stuck in that container. And I just happened to get a piece of toast with Vegemite, and it says something about Vegemite, the best spread for vitamin B. I thought, oh, actually, I like that. I'm going to use that. Thanks, Vegemite. But I love that piece, because there's a point to having the woman's heart outside of her. It's about that sense of humanity being lost for the sake of objective knowledge, and how much longer are we willing to compromise that? We know, this probably sounds a bit cynical, but, we already exist in a compromised academic world. So how much more are we willing to compromise within something that's already compromised? And being able to not live a life divided. So always, for me, it's always about finding a way to put that heart back inside that gal, like making sure the two are always really close together, which is the radical roots of writing life, for me at least. And so, part of the post is to kick back, don't be frightened about getting yourself stuck, but also to stick up, put your hand up, to be the disagreeable one as well. And so Betty St. Pierre says things like to just do the next thing. So as you're writing, whatever it is, just keep moving, do the next thing. It's an incredible amount of trust that we have to put in ourselves as writers, to put in the academic world. But if we don't, what's the consequence of that? So instead, the post sensibilities ask us, as St. Pierre says, to trust that something unimaginable might come out that might change the world bit by bit, word by word, sentence by sentence. And that's incredibly inspiring for me, and I hope you find it inspiring as well. And this is the other thing that Laurel Richardson writes about, creative analytic practice, which she talks about. This is the kind of writing that touches us where we live in our bodies. And certainly there's that sensibility that sits underneath draw as well. If you think about then, if we're going to be brave enough to do this kind of work, what are some of the criteria perhaps that we might want to think about? And from Laurel, she's thought about this really carefully in terms of, and again, you can see there's a real ethic sensibility here. She's not wanting to lead people astray so that you'll be cast aside and never get your PhD or never be able to get anything published. She says there are some things that we have to pay attention to if this work is going to be considered as academic writing. It's not just writing itself, but academic writing. So the first thing is, does this work make a substantive contribution? And what she's saying here is, does it tell us something really important about life, about social life? Is it deeply grounded in life and an understanding of that life, the experience of that life, how it's felt? And how has that informed the construction of the text? So how has that substantive contribution informed the concern? And here's where I'm talking about it, thinking around how do you braid theory, the thinking, with the aesthetics of the writing and the craft of the writing. So the substantive contribution is always about these two things together, a dyad, if you like, always thinking, and sometimes, on the in-betweens of those. And this then leads to the next point, which is about aesthetic merit of the text. Does it work aesthetically? And so that's where the imperative to turn to theorists who write about their writing assists you to develop your own writing style. At the moment, I've got a PhD student who's looking at teachers, teachers of Asian background and who identify as Asian in secondary schools and their experiences of race. And so they are an Asian student themselves, a teacher themselves, and they're sitting theirs up, and they've always been taught how to make dim sims or dim sums. And so their whole thesis is set up around the making of a dim sum. Everything from being in his grandmother's kitchen to what goes on in the school tuck shop, and everything is a recipe. Every chapter is a recipe. So he's really thinking around this idea of multiculturalism, theories of Asian critical race theory, and how he can bring that together. And the challenge for him is to push him constantly to really develop the aesthetics of that. So to read recipe books, find recipe books that he likes. How are they presented? What's included? What's the language? And to practice that. And so it's that idea of analysing a range of creative texts to get a sense of what are the aesthetics that are working here that I can adopt. So for me, just to go back to Sylvia and Shirley, I love the idea of a villanelle. It's a beautiful constraint. It's saying, okay, for me, it fits with that idea of if we're stuck in that jar, what can we do to be able to breathe? Loosen the lid a little so we can breathe. And for me, a villanelle does that because I can play with ideas and I can play with language. I'm still, in the jar, but I'm playing and experimenting. And I find that quite freeing and liberating. So I read a lot of villanelles. I practice villanelles. Some of them are terrible. Some of them I think are okay. But I certainly love the idea of using that creativity to analyze my own thinking. So that's the aesthetic merit. Is the text artistically shaped, satisfying, complex, and not boring? That's one of the criteria. The next part is around the reflexivity and thinking around within your text and what you create and what you produce. Is there a sense of how you have come to write this? Have you shared your own writing strategies, practices, your writing life in the text? Where are you? Are you absent or are you present? Are you writing in third person, first person, second person? Where is your life in this text? And so without that, it's kind of not, if you're not putting yourself into the text, you're not holding yourself accountable to the work that you're doing. That's part of what Richardson would say, because if we go back to no textual staging is ever innocent, you are always already there, whether you acknowledge it or not. So you might as well just jump right in and embrace it. It's kind of a Laura Richardson approach, and finding your way, a way to do that. I've put down here pressing close. Some people might think of this as impact, but the etymological roots of the word impact actually come from the 14th century, and they're not about striking with force or pushing or shoving or, striking down or in any way. They're actually about pressing close. And I really like that idea because it's this sense of how does this affect me? How does it press close to my mind, to my soul, my body? How am I experiencing this text emotionally, intellectually? Is it making me feel new things? Am I asking new questions? Is it moving me to write? Is it moving me to change my thinking, my research practices? Is it moving me to action? And for me, that's what pressing close is. And then the other part of, we're all researchers, so our job at one level is to produce new knowledge about the world in which we live, new knowledge about a particular reality. And so the next criteria is, does it give us a sense of lived experience? Does it flesh out? Does it put bones on the flesh of life that is real? That when people pick up your text, they can say, yeah, that's credible. That is a credible account of a social, cultural, individual or communal sense of this lived experience. So I think they're really useful. They're really useful to have because they touch on the theory, the creativity, the criticality all at once. So when you're thinking about potentially trying this kind of work, these are the things that you can be thinking around. How are we going for time, Susan?
We're getting pretty close. Yeah, we're getting
close. So what I might ask, what we might do then, and I'm happy to share these with you somehow. But what I put together next, and we'll come back to this if you like, but I've got a couple of little videos. They're only a minute long, and they refer to particular theorists that in the draw group, many of us turn to for inspiration. So some of you would know of the work of Sara Ahmed, and one of her writing strategies, which you might be familiar with, is to follow words around. So if she's got the promise of happiness, and it's the part of happiness that she follows. Her recent book, Complaint, she follows that word complaint around in a particular context. She's got another book called What's the Use? And it's all about following that word use around. Willful subjects is another one. So if you've got time, have a look at that. And there's a couple of ways that hopefully you might find that interesting. And then if I just keep flicking through, Ursula Le Guin, who I know is not considered an academic writer, but she actually has written a lot around theorizing writing and representation. This is her idea about writing gorgeous sentences. And even just putting gorgeous and sentence together already makes me smile. We don't often, how often do you think of a word you've written in your or a sentence you've written in your thesis as gorgeous? But why shouldn't we? And I guess that's part of the provocation. Why shouldn't our theses and our academic work be gorgeous? So take a look at that one. And then the last one is a compilation of ideas from Kathleen Stewart, who's very well known for her work on ordinary effects. And then most recently, The Hundreds with Lauren Ballant. So some of the provocations that I've had, so if you think about the word that you started with today, one of the things that we would do is go back to the word that you wrote down and think about, well, what's it doing now? If we think about words as being sentient beings that move in the world, how is it now moving in relation to everything that you've just heard? And you could write a piece around that. And then if after watching Sara Ahmed, the next thing would be follow that word around, go where it goes. And Sara Ahmed is very good, and I'm an absolute fan of this as well. Look it up, search its etymology. You might be surprised by what you found. With the word impact, I was asked to give a keynote on research. What's your impact? And I thought, oh my God, I don't even know where to begin with it. I don't think my work has had any impact. And I thought, just follow that word around, just tune in, pay attention. And then when I realized that the etymological roots are about pressing close, I thought, imagine if we thought that about all of our research. Not what's your impact? We thought, how close does your work press to people? How close does it come to that part of the body where the soul and the heart and the mind reside? I mean, what a different way of thinking about research impact. So it's absolutely worth doing that piece and then follow it, expand how you're thinking about your word. And then with Ursula Le Guin, one of the things that she talks about a lot in her writing is this idea of encountering. And so it would be around thinking, when did you first encounter that word? And it might be a word that you've chosen that's relevant to your thesis. It could be affect. It could be rhizome or lines of flight, or I don't know, it could be anything like that. But thinking around, when did I first, what's my story with this word? Where did it begin? It might have begun when you were a baby, who knows? But just following it and writing about that encounter with the particular word. And then the last piece is riffing off Laura Richardson and Lauren Ballant, is to pay attention to the affect. How is this word moving? How is it jumping? How is it, tripping you up, asking you to pay attention? And then using that idea of beautiful constraint and writing exactly 100 words around that word to keep on expanding it. So there's some provocations you might like to try, and I will find a way to share the videos with you. I hope they might come through if I share the PowerPoint, but if not, I can share. I'm very happy to share them with you. And then finally, an invitation. If you'd like to be part of the draw group, jump onto our Facebook page. we're a little bit quiet at the moment. I mentioned to Susan, we're in a rebuilding phase, but we will be starting. We do meet every morning at 8 o'clock for 2 hours. I'm there every weekday unless I'm sick or, something happens, but somebody is usually there. And we write, we talk about our writing, people share what they're reading, and away we go in 20, 30-minute bursts. So you're more than welcome to join us if you'd like to, but all of the information is on the Facebook page. So we have that's the Zoom link if you wanted to join. We have our monthly gatherings, which will start in July. We have a mid-year weekend usually called a Critical Delight, where people just share what they're doing. It's a way to experiment, try out and we do that in hybrid mode. And at the end of the year, we have an intensive summer school where we come together for a week. And it's all about theory, writing, performing. So that's all on the Facebook page. And then the last thing, if we'd had time, I would have loved to share this with you. This was another villanelle I wrote about something that happened on my way to the office. My sandals broke, and that's them there broken. So happy for you to have a look at that if you feel like it. And then here are all the references that I've included today, as well as references you might like to look at related to Sara Ahmed. So I think Ahmed, Le Guin, Kathleen Stewart, and then just the last thing for me to say is thank you. Thank you for indulging me and letting me talk about something that I feel incredibly passionate about. I don't know if we have time for questions or comments or thoughts. I'll stop sharing so that we...
Oh, Liz, what a beautiful, beautiful presentation. In fact, I was drawn back to when I was reading your bio for the first time, and you talked about your love of quilting and how you love to make quilts for people that you love to wrap them around. And today's session actually felt like a big wrapping around of a long quilt. And, just you probably haven't been able to read the chat, but people have been contributing as they've been responding to you sharing. And so much, particularly when you were reading some of your work, people were actually describing just how nurturing that was for them. And it reminded me of the warm quilt wrapping around. So thank you from all of us. I know that people were giving you a little round of applause there as I was just chatting. A really, really heartfelt thank you for your presentation today. Look, we've got, we don't have much time, but we've got probably, if people would like to either unmute, I know many of us, some of us have had to leave, but if there's any thought or noticing or curiosity or response or question that you might have, feel free to take a moment, or just to sharing if you'd like to share something in response to Liz's session today.
Hi, Liz. I'm Rebecca. It's lovely to meet you.
Hi,
And such a joy to listen to what you've just shared with us. And I just want to share that for me, who I'm at the very beginning of my journey into this whole space, you've given me, like, this idea of being radical in our writing is just sitting with me so well, because I'm really challenging and I feel like I'm pushing up against some of those boundaries of writing. I'm learning to write and even what that is and how to do that. So constantly asking my supervisors, my poor supervisors, constantly asking them questions about, can I do this and can I do that? And just listening to the way that you've been able to share and some of the research that you're drawing on, that's given me real courage to kind of go forward and find these new ways of doing things, pushing into spaces that I don't know what the space is, and I'm not quite sure if it even exists, but even just having the courage to go on that journey. And words for me are, language. I love language, but as a visual artist, I'm really trying to translate some of what you're saying around language into the visual arts, and using the visual arts as language to kind of push into some of that space. So you've given me lots to think about. So thank you so much for sharing today. It's been absolutely joyful.
Oh, and that is a joy to hear that, Rebecca. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I'm really pleased you found it inspiring. I noticed in the chats there was a comment about feeling like an imposter as you're starting to write. And people in the drawers, as we call ourselves, we often talk around that. But the way that we kind of console ourselves is to, this is going to sound really kind of hopefully not flippant, but we do the work. So we practice the writing. We try, we make that brave step. We share it. We talk about it. We read, and when we say to ourselves, there are so many words out there in the world, and they are all a gift to us as academics. So I noticed someone else said, about reading novels. And I kind of have that sense of, when I look at the work of, the Bell Jar, say, just because I've been reading it, or even Shirley Jackson, because I'm reading her novels, I can see her feminist sensibilities in her novels. So there are no words that are not able for us to draw upon and draw inspiration theoretically or aesthetically. Simone de Beauvoir, everyone talks about Simone de Beauvoir. She wrote novels and plays, as well as all of the second sex, which everybody knows. So I really encourage you, just explore, do that wandering with a WA, and don't be frightened to wonder as you do it, just to see, because you just don't know. And I love the picture that Chelsea, you've got of the garden being around the sunflowers. I had a student who came to me and said, I hate this. I've written my whole thesis. She came to the first draw school and she just went, oh my God, I'm completely rewriting my thesis. She had a complete draft of it. And she loved the idea of writing life. And she lives in suburban Brisbane, but she has a garden and chickens and vegetables. And she was writing about women's garden stories, but her own garden story was not the thesis. So for me, it was a way for her to find a hook to be able to write life in the way that, so that she was not divided to not live a life divided. So, I was constantly asking her, write down what you did with the chickens this morning, then bring that to me as your academic writing. Now let's think about, who else is writing about being in the garden? What about the women, the data that you have and the theorists that you're working with? And so slowly, she was able to remold her whole thesis so that it was about, working as women in gardens with compost and chickens and things that die and weeds, occasionally some produce. So it's really thinking around what is happening in your life, your writing life, your researching life. Where are those moments of connection? How are they speaking to one another? Are they speaking to one another? Might they be? Could they be? Why aren't they? Really try to think around, because most of us do research because we care very deeply about something. And often that something is very deeply connected to us as people. So at the moment, I'm doing a project on consent education in university residential colleges. And we've interviewed students and we've heard all manner of stories around sexual violence and trauma and harassment and how consent education is not working. Part of the reason for me wanting to do that is I was in a residential college 20, 30 years ago. The same things were happening to me, and they're still happening now. And that to me is unacceptable. I do not want anybody in a residential college to experience that. So for me, there's a real personal kind of passion to say enough. And so probably all of you in the research you're doing, there is something sitting there that you care about from a research perspective, but I can probably hand on heart say it matters very deeply to you personally for many reasons. And there's absolutely no shame in that. In fact, just reading today, Dorothy Allison is another person I love, and she was saying that we're taught to hide all of these things away, to secrete them in a box, to put them in the container, tighten the screw. This idea that our lives are not relevant in research is very strongly ingrained in what we do. And it's really about being courageous to say, what happens if I just loosen that lid a little bit and let myself breathe? What happens?
Liz, thank you for being so inspirational for us today, and also for being so generous in taking the time for us to be able to share some reflections and some wonderings with you as well. I can see from the comments that everyone has really been just so inspired by your presentation in so many different ways. So I think we're all heading away from today's presentation with a lighter step and enthusiasm for future. Look,
Yeah.
I thank you on behalf of all of us for your presentation today.
Thank you for having me.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, and please reach out, you know, only an email away. So if I often get asked to, after doing presentations like this, people will send me little pieces of writing. More than happy to have a read, have a quick Zoom chat if you want, but please, you know, don't, I'd love to hear from you, and you don't reach out if you'd like to chat some more, and of course join us in the draw group if you'd like to. Thank you, Susan. Please thank Robin for me. The book we've got coming out, the draw book, I'll keep you all posted. It's so exciting. Robin has written the preface for it.
Beautiful.
And
we'll be able to share that through the Create Network as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, wonderful.
And for those of you who have just been asking in the chat, we have recorded this, so it will be available through the Create Centre and the YouTube channel on the Create Centre in coming days. So if you'd like to go back and revisit, I know I'll be going back and revisiting parts of it, just so I'm able to take in some of the wonderful pictures of your presentation. Our next session, everyone, is going to be Thursday, the 22nd of June at 4:30. So you're very welcome to join us again. And Dr. Katrina Kemp is going to be presenting on pedagogy, creativity and writing. So that will be yet another inspiring session. Thank you everyone for joining today. It's been beautiful to engage with you. And thank you once again, Liz, for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you for inviting me.
Farewell, everyone.
Happy